Yes.
Well, let's get started. Maggie's going to start us with a reading. Thanks, Maggie.
It's always a reading from one of Paul's letters. As I look at this first sentence, I wonder what they're keeping in there. Because when Jesus went to the wedding and blessed water jugs, there was wine inside. So what have they got going on here? But anyway, from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, but we have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying around in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. For we who are living are always being handed over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you.
Thank you. Well, how did anyone get a chance to read 2 Corinthians or watch the movie Romero? Or maybe if you know something about Oscar Romero, you could share that. But Jan, you said you nodded your head to reading 2 Corinthians.
I did.
Any memorable moment?
I know how being a Jewish mother came to be. We have suffered so much for you. And look at you.
Oh, Paul was being the Jewish mother.
Oh,
Yes.
but there were pearls in there.
Yeah.
God loves a cheerful giver.
Yeah.
There's
I think this is a memorable passage because it does talk about how it's like we are dust and to dust we shall return, and at the same time, there's a treasure in here. You know, there's the treasure inside of us. We are the treasure, you know, but in our bodies, the treasure is more than our bodies. Yeah.
yes.
Anyone else for that? Yeah.
I want to know who a super apostle is. Third heaven.
Yeah.
Questions that could be.
The super apostles. Yeah.
Super apostles. Yeah.
Would they be DC or Marvel superheroes?
Well,
They're the ones with the capes. Okay, yeah. And
Paul doesn't like them, or they don't like Paul, one or the other.
Yeah, the S on the chest. Yeah. Well, this is so I don't know, you know, we've all had different kinds of interactions with the Bible. One thing I wanted to share today is that if you are a Bible reader, or if you want to get into the Bible more, it's really good to have a good study Bible. And there's lots of them out there. This one is, I mentioned it in an earlier time, the HarperCollins Study Bible. It's a nice study Bible because it looks at the Bible from the perspective of what's called historical critical, just the idea of setting the books into context, and that kind of what we had noted during, I think, the third session when we talked about Paul and Paul's writings, and how sometimes the text, you know, it's come down to us to us in a way that's from, you know, people passing it on, passing it on. And sometimes things get added and sometimes they get subtracted. And not that it can't all be valuable. And at the same time, it's just helpful to know that background. And this HarperCollins Study Bible is a helpful tool for looking at scripture in that way. And then this is actually a study Bible that at my last workplace I got to work on with some people. I was just very tangentially involved, but it's called the Renovar's Spiritual Formation Bible. And what it tries to do is look at the scripture from the perspective of demotion and Christian formation. And how can these books, how can the Bible, how can scripture be a tool for shaping us into the life of that we see, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, the life that we see in that life, and then also living in our lives day in and day out.
What's it called?
It's called the Renovari Spiritual Formation Bible.
I better take a picture of it.
Sure.
Thanks.
I didn't know they had.
Yeah,
I
and
think you did.
What's the translation there?
so these are both NRSV. So they aren't there's a newly updated version of the NRSV, but they don't have.
But it's not the
Bible.
No, it's the new it's what we read in service each Sunday. So, but we will be out of here by 11:30. So I read 2 Corinthians using this Bible, and one of the helpful aspects of these study Bibles, many of them, is they set the books in context. And this was helpful for me, and I think it might be helpful for you. And again, kind of coming back to all of these are letters to communities that are that these communities are. He's addressing challenges or affirming the life of communities. And this is actually the person who wrote the study materials for 2 Corinthians. Ellen Cherry is the author of the study materials. And this is Ellen Cherry's quick description of the Corinthian church. So this letter picks up amid a stressful relationship between Paul and the local church he founded. He and the Corinthians have issues to work out before they can continue in ministry together. That work is the crucible that tests their Christian strength and ingenuity. We have the Corinthians side of the story only through Paul's version of it, and he was writing not to us, but to people who knew that history. Still, we can see the outlines of what has happened. We know from 1 Corinthians that these Christians were fumbling as they sought to work out Christian discipline regarding food, sex, marriage, and lawsuits. It would appear that Paul visited the church a second time after he wrote that letter, either to follow up on the charge of incest in 1 Corinthians 5, or in response to some other weighty matter. For whatever reasons, the meeting did not go well. There must have been an unpleasant scene because Paul left early, leaving sour feelings all around. Perhaps this gave some members of the church the impetus to listen to other gospel preachers, the super apostles, and to question Paul's authority. From this letter, as well as from the letter to the Galatian churches, we know that many people evangelized and that some of them were apparently unscrupulous. Whatever it was, one crisis seemed to have led to another. After leaving Corinth for the second time, Paul may have written an angry letter to the congregation, in parentheses, which we do not have, instructing them to discipline an offending member. The offender could have been the man guilty of incest reported in 1 Corinthians, or it could have been someone from a completely unrelated incident in which Paul or his authority was called into question during his second visit. Some think that we see parts of such a letter in the last 4 chapters of 2 Corinthians. Whatever happened, everyone was so distressed that Paul decided not to return to Corinth himself for fear of having another problematic confrontation that would upset everyone again. Instead, he sent Titus to see what had happened and to try to patch things up. Paul was apparently distressed that he might lose this congregation to his apostolic competitors. So, and then she actually goes on to say, and actually the church did respond and they did discipline the person. And then Paul in his letter is writing, you might have disciplined this person too hard. You know, like you went overboard. So anyway.
I rest my case.
Sounds like real life.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, well, so if you haven't figured it out from this series of times together, this is not about the books. This is more trying to give a sense of what Paul was doing in his ministry and the themes, some of the themes of Paul, like the Richard Rohr content that you may have listened to as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Something he talks about the gospel. Well, I don't think that he was exposed to the gospels. Does he mean
gospel in a different sense?
Yeah, I think the gospel is he, in his experience on the Damascus Road,
Right.
and then also as he was learning it from others who had been impacted by Jesus. So like the apostles.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the written gospels,
Right.
since they weren't written until. But there could have been, I mean, there were stories.
Living gospels.
There could have been writings
Right.
that had been passed around that then were consolidated. Like they think that Mark was probably written in the put together in the late 50s, and so those writings were around, but it took someone to put them together. So it could have been he could have been referring those two.
But a lot of them couldn't write.
Right.
Scribes to do it, and the scribes wouldn't say what they were supposed to say.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So and as we mentioned last week, Paul's really figuring this out. It's not like we read back on Paul like Paul knew what he was doing, but reading Paul forward, Paul is working it out, in these real experiences with real communities, and also this transferring, his own thinking and his own experience from the Jewish life that he had known to the Jewish life that he is now experiencing. And there's going to be more things that come out. Like just this week, I didn't read the full article on it, but there have been some new, not new manuscripts, some rediscovery of manuscripts of Paul that were at different places throughout in Europe that they think probably are somehow relate to the existing letters. So other, discoveries will be made over time. So we don't have the full picture, but at the same time, Paul didn't really have the full picture either, because this was all being worked out in real time. And another thing that this time, together, and the chance that I had to reflect on this is the importance of community for Paul, and how he was founding and being a pastor to these communities. And these communities were helping people to become more like Jesus, to become more like Christ. At the same time, they have these challenges. And so discussion question for today is, for you personally, what's been a community that's been really helpful for you in your formation in Christ likeness, or in, being a God follower? And I'd say for me, one of the formative community experiences was when Felicia and I first got married. We actually lived with 4 other families, Episcopalians, in a big house down in Denver, that during the Depression, one of those big houses that had been carved up into smaller apartments. And that was a great experience for us, because there was a faith component. We didn't have children, and we got to hang out with the children in the community. And we also were really neighborhood centered. Like we were members of our neighborhood, and we were being responsive to the needs of our neighbors. It was really great.
What was the address? Do you remember?
1654 Humboldt.
Humboldt Street.
Uh,
I lived in a similar house. I had a room in a similar house at 750 Clarkson.
okay. Yeah.
And when I was shopping and asked for something to be delivered and gave that address, the eyes would get big and they say, "Is there an apartment number?" I said, "No, that's the house."
Mm-hmm.
Because they knew that, on today's market, that was a multi-million-dollar house that I was living in, but it wasn't mine. I slept in a room.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
An easy walk to the cathedral, which was very convenient.
Yeah. So what's a community? So this could have been a workplace, or a friend, or a spouse, or a neighbor, a school you're in, a faith community. What's a community experience that helped to shape you?
One of the best ones for me was Education for Ministry, that 4-year program, VFM. It covers The first year is totally devoted to the Old Testament, the second year to the New Testament, third year to church history, and that includes histories not only of Occidental Christianity, but of Oriental Christianity,
Hmm.
which is a really different thing and very interesting.
Yeah.
Really
then-
big.
Yeah. It's the first 3,000 years of Christianity was the title of the book we worked from for that year.
Hmm.
And then the final year was looking at contemporary theologies and communities. And it was also forming a community of people among the participants. And so that was really special too, because we heard each other's spiritual autobiographies every year for 4 years. And people would lead theological reflections, and yeah, so it was a very,
And all 4 years were in the same group.
yeah.
So somebody was in year 1 and year 2, there was somebody from
Mhm.
all 4 years. And it was so interesting to see the thread.
Mhm.
There was never not a thread
Mhm. Mhm.
in Old Testament and modern theology
Yeah.
or the history of the church. It was really, really remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so somebody would talk about Paul going back and getting after those Corinthians, and somebody else from the next year would talk about the Crusades and what was happening there, and the fact that in one crusade, this really blew Betsy's mind, that in one crusade they headed out to kill the infidels and liberate Jerusalem, and they couldn't get that far because they ran out of money. And so instead they turned on the Eastern Orthodox Church.
Oh, great.
And she was like, what? But that, that's kind of our history. So
Yeah.
making those things, yeah.
The other community, I think, is this one. I don't know that this one appreciates itself
Hmm.
enough. As I look at some pretty, what seem trivial issues
Hmm.
that became really large issues and hurtful,
Hmm.
hateful stuff going around. And here we are.
Mhm.
All years.
Mhm.
Yeah. Everybody greeting and loving one another despite some really thorny stuff.
And you're even thinking of the other two congregations.
I'm kind of thinking just of St. Paul's.
Oh, really?
here.
Okay.
I should too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Wow.
That does come to mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Right.
Your mind,
Yeah.
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 But
I think for me, I had a practicum on, we were finishing up our Christian and spiritual formation class, and the practicum was the professor. She was fabulous,
Mhm.
and we became a very close group, and just training our hearts and minds and soul to listen to the Holy Spirit
Mhm.
was extremely formational. And then it's been almost 2 years ago when we moved up here, and the adult formation here, I tell some of my friends down in Littleton, Inglewood, I say, for me, it's like being in a seminary class almost sometimes. It's so rich and deep that it's really been extremely meaningful for me. So,
great.
One of mine was Stephen Ministry.
Mhm.
Lexington, Kentucky, because you get assigned somebody and you don't know anything about them. And
Mhm.
they have very strange lives
Mm.
sometimes, and you have to figure out how you're going to communicate with that person. You know, somebody that would, you know, horse racing, betting, all kinds of things that are not on the up and up. And then you have somebody that is very devout and that they're sick and then you visiting and you find out so much from that person. And then you have some that have children and they tell you all about their children, and then the woman turns out to be a thief. She just goes around to big art galleries and she figures out how to steal paintings and all kinds of stuff.
Whoa. It's like one of those shows I'm watching on Netflix.
But then, you know, you have to realize she's a child of Christ, and she thinks she is too. And so it's, and then some that are just so sweet and helpful. And then you have to watch people die. Sometimes they come to the bedside. And so that was very meaningful. And then Cursillo was very big one, because you're just surrounded by love the whole time you're there, and then you go out and meet with people weekly and form a really close group. So,
Things I haven't heard about in years.
Yeah.
Yep, we haven't talked about Stephen Ministry or even Cursillo here.
Any other communities? Yeah.
Yeah, he and I were together. We started at St. Matthias, Episcopal Church down in Monmouth. I had this amazing experience of community, like kind of being in Christian community, because I went through confirmation there, and kids went through confirmation. Potlucks all the time. We're involved in the community. I'm down on several. Like I really grew at my sense of actually being in a way, because I have several negative experiences being in community. This one was just like, it's very, this family.
I'll add to that too. We started going there in 2014, but years before, when there was a huge split and we was church, the story that I learned was that at St. Matthias, the priest and all of the leadership left. And the next Sunday, whoever had a key just came and opened up the church, and they still had church. And even though I wasn't there for that, it's in the DNA, and you can feel that, that kind of consistency when we stay at the and Monument, in a lot of ways, wasn't a community for us, the external. Politically, we kind of didn't fit. But that microcosm was all of those same people who politically we might not fit with, but that same consistency and devotion to each other changed the way I was able to build a relationship with all of that difference. So it was very interesting.
Oh, wow. That speaks to me. Starting early on, age 17, when I went to the commune for 7.5 years, aka convent. So I got to know what a community is. I know there are nuns that have had ex-nuns that have had terrible experiences. I cried when I left. I had to leave because I had to follow my truth. And my truth was, as much as I love these women, and they taught me so much about myself, that faith, okay, what was I heard that? They taught me a lot of stuff. I knew that I couldn't stay. So I left, and I met my husband with a blind date through another accident. Anyway, and so I feel like I've had the best of both worlds. I've had that wonderful experience with deeply wonderful women who I still stay in touch with, who sang at our wedding. I also have grandchildren, and that's why I left. I wanted to have children. So that was the important one. So we moved to from Indianapolis to Michigan, moved there. And that's why I was late today. Last week I was late and didn't attend today. I'm so sorry. I missed the Eucharist here today. But I broke bread with our Michigan church. And for 6 years since we moved from Michigan. It was a very unusual Catholic church. We moved out here and we've stayed connected for 6 years since we've been. The key. So it's a small group of people. Catholics, for some reason, need big churches, Roman Catholic churches, big churches, brick and mortar churches. So we had a small group of neighbors. It started out as a neighborhood gathering. We said, we don't like this. We need to experience Christianity in a smaller area, in a smaller setting. So we petitioned the Cardinal of Detroit, and he was really big into the Vatican II thing, John Deere. He gave us permission to start a church. That if we could prove that this area was growing and it could support itself. So less than 50 families, less. We had church at a middle school. Our kids were baptized on the cafeteria, in the cafeteria at this local middle school. Anyway, we used to call Our Lady of the Cafeteria, but anyway, we lived there. We brought the vessels of guilt. We brought everything with us to the middle school. One day, the janitors forgot to open up the school. So we just went to the knoll outside and we broke bread there on the grass. And it was just that's the community I'm still connected with emotionally. But you guys, oh my God, for 6 years I've been looking for a similar kind of community. And I think I found it here.
Yeah, and I'd say that's what, that was what Paul was trying to do, is create these spaces where people can be involved in one another's lives, be shaped by the practices of the church. And he didn't even call it church, just be shaped by these practices, by living in the story of life, death, and resurrection. And then also, I think there was this understanding that this outlook is different than the outlook of Caesar. The outlook of Jesus as Lord is different than the outlook of Caesar as Lord. And so how do we create these spaces that help those in the community to live a life of fidelity to Jesus, and knowing that, we also, give to Caesar what's Caesar, give to God what's God's. We live in both worlds at the same time. And also we need this space where we can have fidelity to Jesus and to God, and to this kind of understanding. So this time together really is on community, and I was looking for a way to describe this that is contemporary, that we might understand a little bit better than during Paul's time, but definitely has a sense of alignment with what the people in Paul's time might have been experiencing. But before I go to that, I wanted to share some really helpful, just some bullet points from the Richard Rohr series about the great themes of Paul. And again, if you haven't listened to that, I think it would be another great summer project. You have about 7 different summer projects there. But it's so good.
We'll get those and you'll come. It's on our ass.
Sure, right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you listen. Well, you just,
guys.
Yeah. Listen in your earbuds. Paul was probably an Enneagram 8, if you know the Enneagram. And it's in the Enneagram, there's 9 numbers, and one of the ways to group those numbers is a dependent type, an aggressive type, and a withdrawing type. and 8 is an aggressive number. So what it means is that, and Jan, you're an 8, right?
We just knocks blocks over.
Right. 8's not blocks.
Something he's
Yeah, that's right. They get it done. Yeah. And yeah. So there's lots of ways to describe an 8. That's a way. And also it's sometimes in their communication styles, they can say it and they just, they just say it, and they don't have as much of a backward looking concern over what they said. Whereas I, as a 5, I'm a withdrawing type, and I'll say a little thing and then I'll be thinking about it like for the next day, because I'm not sure how they came across or what have you. But 8s will just say it, and so
Without a
Paul, an
filter.
aggressive. What's that?
Without a filter.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. And that's part of the challenge, is to develop the filter over time. Another way that Rohr describes Paul is that he was a pain mystic, in this sense that he was able to bring meaning from the suffering that he experienced. And that certainly comes through in his writings, that suffering has shaped him as a person, in part the experience, but also just in part the reflecting on the experience and living in with a kind of suffering changes us outlook. Another unique aspect of Paul was that he was a Roman citizen who could speak for sure Hebrew and Greek and read Hebrew and Greek, probably spoke and wrote Latin, or was it? Yeah. And that's what was needed for what he was doing, because he could see from the Jewish perspective, but then he could also communicate what was happening to the Roman world, outside of Israel. Another thing about his teaching is that he does try to connect information with transformation. So Romans, there's a lot of information in there, but he's also trying to, like this passage, the treasure in clay vessels. He is being a communicator of concepts, but then he's also doing his best to bring it back to, well, how does this make us different as people? And another thing I think that he does is that he does show us what following Jesus means in community. These are his letters, and he's putting a kind of flesh onto Jesus is saying that we should hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself cannot, if you want to be Jesus' disciple. And it's not that we should hate, our fathers and mothers, but what we are open to is this idea of a different kind of life, and following Jesus is going to lead us to that different kind of life. Another thing that I think, that when we think about, and this came across while I was reading 2 Corinthians this time, is that there's 2 words, orthodoxy and orthopraxy. A lot of us are familiar with that term orthodoxy, which means a kind of right thinking. Like that's why we have the Nicene Creed, is because the early church felt like they needed to take the concepts, the theological concepts about God, and put it into a statement for uniformity of the church at that time. But then there's this also idea of orthopraxy, which Paul, because of the way his books are written, they are giving a lot of, this is the way you should be, this is what the community should do. It's very easy to make them into a kind of new orthodoxy or a new law, whereas he doesn't get into it in his writings as much, but he does do some things with orthopraxy and the way that we should be, or the way that we can be together, the practices that lead us to become the kind of people that Jesus would have us to be. And so these are the things that, in part have come down to us in the tradition of the church, like the Eucharist, like the 7 sacraments. Those are all about orthopraxy. And yeah, there's thinking that goes behind them, but the idea of baptism and the idea Eucharist and the idea of ordination of a priest. All these sacraments are practices that have come down to us. And then there are other practices, that we take from the history of the church of, in EFM, when you're studying some of the exemplars of faith, like a St. Francis or like a Julian of Norwich, these people that we learn about and learn from, that's part of the orthopraxy of the church that we need to make sure to keep in mind when we're reading something like Paul.
Well, do you think that Paul would have liked the Pentecost? I don't think he would.
He wouldn't have liked Pentecost?
Yeah, I don't think he would like it.
How come?
He wouldn't like all those different people there that, weren't thinking similarly.
Mm-hmm.
You are Gentile.
Yeah.
He did say once, either Jew or Gentile.
Slave or
Male,
free.
slave or free. He did have that.
Yeah, he did that, but I mean, of course, he happened after Pentecost. So, but he was still against Jesus when Pentecost happened. He was fighting Jesus.
At the time, at the time, I don't think for sure. Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, right. At the time, for sure, right. Because now, everybody's getting exposure to God. That's right. I don't think it would have liked it at the time. For sure.
I was thinking about your word orthopraxy, which I'd never heard, but when I didn't get all the way through 2 Corinthians, but one thing that really struck me this time when I read, you showed that you are a letter from Christ, the result of our ministry, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. That on tablets of human hearts just really struck me this time. It's Corinthians 3, verse 3. And so there's so many sides to Paul. And that one struck me as beautiful and tender.
Yeah. Well, and going back to what Paul was thinking, he was a Jew, and they were expecting a much different Messiah than who Jesus was, but still he was a Jew. And this is, such an important part of our perspective on Paul. And one of the things about Judaism, and this is going back to a couple of times ago, but just that there was not, salvation in Judaism was really the community. That was the saving space. They weren't concerned with individualistic salvation. Life in community was salvation for Judaism, still is, and for the way that Paul was thinking. And this is what leads Richard Rohr in that series on the great themes of Paul. One of the themes is salvation is participation. I grew up Southern Baptist, and the thing that you had to respond to at some point in being Southern Baptist was the altar call. And we did it, and I'm not going to say it's not. There can be some value in an altar call because it's as a sign of response, of surrender, of it's in front of the whole community. There's some value in that kind of going in or getting out of the pew or the seat and responding to an invitation. And at the same time, the thinking of Paul was that by participating in the community, that is how we are part of a saving life that is expressed in the community. And so we don't need to spend our time on thinking about our own, whether we get to heaven when we die, or our own guilt and our own need for forgiveness, though we do need to be loving people in community. But the whole focus is on what is the community life that we are bringing about for the sake of the redemption of the life of ourselves and the life of the world. And the example that came to me, the contemporary example that came to me when trying to explain this about, I think, what Paul was doing in those communities, is Latin America in the 1960s and 1970s and 1980s. And what was happening with a way of understanding the gospel that is called liberation theology. And that's where the movie Romero comes in, because he was an archbishop in El Salvador in the late 1970s until he was assassinated in 1980. And he started out as, they thought he would be, because the conflict was between the families that were of more Spanish origin, so who'd colonized El Salvador, and then the native peoples, the native peoples like Native Americans. I mean, they were their version of Native Americans, and that's what led to the conflict. And over time, the church realized that if it was going to be the church, it needed to be the church for everyone. And to be the church for everyone meant that it needed to more so identify with everyone, but to advocate for those who were being oppressed, the native peoples, because you can't be the church if you can't meet your daily needs, if you don't have the means to live. And in this thinking of liberation theology, there came this different notion of salvation. And it is even more Roman Catholic notion of salvation, in that participation in the life of the church is what brings salvation. And so, Raven, would you mind reading this paragraph that right under then what is salvation?
Salvation is not something otherworldly, regard to which the present life is merely a test. Salvation, the communion of human beings with God and among themselves, is something which embraces all of human reality, transforms it, and leads it to its fullness in Christ. Thus, the center of God's salvific design is Jesus Christ, who by his death and resurrection transforms the universe and makes it possible for the person to reach fulfillment as human being. This fulfillment embraces every aspect of body and spirit, individual and society, person and cosmos, time and eternity. Christ, and Father, perfect God, man, takes on all the dimensions of human existence.
So this is, and like the next statement on the outline says, this really brings us to a kind of thinking about salvation that is, we're participating in a salvation that certainly includes ourselves. And it also includes God's redemption of social systems, of the way we relate to one another as humans and other living creatures. The way that we're living our lives day in and day out is what we are working on the salvation of. And this is, that idea that Paul presents in Romans 8, that the creation is groaning, waiting for us to figure all this out. And this is an example of what I think Paul was attempting to do, was to form these communities of people that were in a setting that was not life-giving for them because of the way that the Roman world was. And at the same time, they were looking out for one another, but then they were also looking out for, the city or the place that they were living, to bring about this kind of communal salvation.
So complicated. I remember when that happened, when the nuts were killed, Gene Donovan. We Salvador was. I mean, it's so complicated. I totally forgot that Romero was kind of put in by Rome to kind of, yes, he won't rock the boat. They thought.
Yeah.
And it took him the experiences of what he literally saw, what was happening to those people. He couldn't not speak out. He had the courage to tell the president you're lying. And before he would have been able to have that courage, he was there to kind of keep peace and placate the government. And, oh my, it was so beautiful.
This is kind of a mind shift from the way many of us in Christianity have thought of salvation as an individual thing. When were you saved? When did you accept? To look at it, salvation as communal is a different. And those often, certainly in parts of Protestantism, who are looking to, they're quoting Paul to emphasize that individual salvation. So this is sort of a shift to look at Paul as emphasizing communal salvation.
It's also, that's a Celtic notion. I cannot be well if unless all of you are well in my community.
So I just discovered when you want to get on your phone, you can get plates. Don't put Pablo Escobar because he came up with, he was not a good guy.
Okay. No Oscar romance.
Yeah. He was a cartel.
Yes.
Yeah, right. A different, yeah.
Marilyn was talking about how that church was formed, and there came a point in my life as I was doing youth ministry and teaching and doing, and it finally occurred to me to ask the question, what is church? What is church? And I always go back to Acts 2:42. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. To me, I mean, you're talking about communal salvation. I'm talking about, when you break it down, churches, preaching, breaking bread together, being in community and praying. It doesn't have to be complex.
Yeah, that was the good stuff.
Yeah.
After Pentecost, that's right after Pentecost.
Sorry, I should say.
No, that's good.
After Pentecost.
No, that's good. No, just to say that was the response to Pentecost. Was a community was formed that did those very.
After I finished reading it, it occurred to me that we are the clay jars. We don't just have clay feet. We're the whole vase, and there's treasure within.
So I won't read this next one, but the response in that setting of El Salvador and liberation theology was this development of what were called ecclesial-based communities. places that were, the intentionality was to support one another and to be shaped in the image of Christ, in response to the oppression that they were facing. And this is, where I want to end next week. Next week is our last time together. Is the homework is Philippians. Another thing that you might not be familiar with is there is actually some kind of like what would be deuterocanonical Paul writings. One is called the Acts of Paul and Thecla. That didn't make the New Testament, but it would be interesting to read at some point for you.
So it's Pharisee.
No, it's just the writing. But how do we respond to our setting? And one of the people that I've been, most inspired by is Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And I'm not going to say that this time is like Nazi Germany. It's not like Nazi Germany. And at the same time, this time is a lot like Paul's, Caesar's Lord or Jesus' Lord. Every time is like that. And I do think that Bonhoeffer can be an inspiration. And so I have a movie listed there that if you do have Amazon Prime, it's free. And I think it's a really great treatment of Bonhoeffer's story as compared to others, because it really shows how complicit the state Lutheran Church in Germany was with the Nazis. And then there's also an essay, and the Acts of Paul and Thecla and the essay by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. These are both in the Google folder that when Lori sends out the weekly e-newsletter, it links to that. And these two things are in there. So a Bonhoeffer movie or an essay by Bonhoeffer you could read this week. And what I hope to do next week is to go back to this, if you want to read it again later, is for future discussion. And Felicia gave me permission to do this. But like, what could our community, I mean, we already do so much. Like, we're involved with Habitat. We just gave the $40,000 to Foco Cafe. What are some other things that we might imagine doing to be, to proclaim Jesus as Lord, inside our community, but also outside our community? And so here's one idea that I have that I couldn't press with vestry. But like, what if we hired a minister of reconciliation? Wow. That every day, or like a super committed volunteer, every day, all they're doing is or their lead thought life is, how do we bring about reconciliation in our community? And not that
a lot about that. She works on that.
Yeah, well,
It's true.
yeah,
Well done.
yeah. So, but what does that look like? How could we put more resources behind that? How could we be a place where people who have different points of view talk with one another? How do we do even more reconciliation than all we're already doing in our community? What are some things that we could do like that? And maybe what we're doing is enough. I just don't know. But that's what I would. It would be great if we have that. I'd love to have that kind of conversation next week with us all, just to kind of be creative and think of different ways that we could do the work of reconciliation and acknowledge that Jesus is Lord and Caesar is not Lord in our our time and place. Because I think this is where, for me, this is where this whole Paul series heads, is because those are the kinds of communities that he was doing his best to create.
Well, we need it so much. I'm so glad you talked about that. So many people this year that said we still come together and worship and have different views. I still met somebody last week who has a little bit different view of St. Paul's holiness, but she comes because of her father. And I thought, thank you for sharing that. And I'm trying not to judge, but we can still sit in the same church and have different approaches to the form of religion. I mean, it's different appreciations, I guess. But I'm sorry, I can't be here
That's
next
okay.
week.
It's okay.
I'll be down breaking bread with Sister Helen Bridger.
Oh.
And go, girl. I gotta do some band-aids. I do.
Well, and you also might just bring some, do some reflecting this week on ways that you do this in your everyday life.
Yeah.
What are ways that you put yourself in the space of being a minister of reconciliation?
Just on the way up here,
Yeah.
we interviewed a basketball guy from Turkey. His mother said, when the Turkish, when he was a student in Turkey, they were burning American flags and breaking crosses, death to Americans, death to Americans. His mother said, oh, hate immigrants. His mother said, you are not hate anybody until you lose them. And so,
All right. Well, have a great week. Hope to see you next week. And yeah, have a good rest of the day.